Well, it's nice to meet you. Thanks for joining us today for the Unclaimed Property webinar. We hope that we've got some interesting discussion for you. So let's get rolling with this thing. You may hear the terms escheat or escheatment. Escheat is an old common law doctrine that in many cases required property be transferred to the Crown so it would not be left in limbo without recognized ownership. Sometime during the 1200s under King Henry III of England, the Crown took interest in escheat as a revenue source. Today, states seem to be taking a renewed interest in escheat for the same reason. All tangible and intangible personal property is subject to escheatment, including gift cards, traveler's checks, cars, utility deposits, jewelry, and accounts receivable credit balances. Today, we'll limit our discussion to credit balances in your customers' AR accounts that arise from such things as overpayments and credit memos. The credit balance may also have come into being because you dispose of your customer's property pursuant to repairman's lien and were lucky enough to receive more at the sale than the customer owed you. I should also state that you probably won't find any laws labeled escheat or escheatment. Most states have Unclaimed Property Acts patterned after the Uniform Unclaimed Property Act. So with that, here are some basic concepts based upon the Uniform Unclaimed Property Act that may be of interest to commercial credit managers. You'll need to review various state laws or contact the respective state treasurer's office for specifics in any given state. First, what constitutes abandonment? That's pretty much common sense. Your customer, the apparent owner, has not transacted business with you for a long period of time, hasn't communicated with you in writing or otherwise, and hasn't otherwise indicated any interest in the property that you're holding. The Uniform Unclaimed Property Act allows for this lack of communication to persist for a period of 3 years from the time your obligation to your customer arose, became payable, or distributable. The property is then presumed abandoned. So what do you do if your company is holding abandoned or unclaimed property? Well, again, it's pretty much common sense, and oftentimes statutes are nothing more than codified common sense, although I know we'll all have trouble accepting that in every case. But common sense will tell you to use your best efforts to locate your customer and return the property. This does not mean you have to hire a private investigator. Just send a letter to the last known address. Call the last known phone numbers or send an email to the last known email address or addresses that you have on file. Note that you must send at least one notice, not less than 60 days and not more than 120 days before you file any report with the state. And if you don't receive a response, well, you've sent your notices. File a report of abandoned property with the appropriate state treasurer. States typically have prescribed forms for this. Generally, the aggregate amount for any claimant must exceed $50. The report will ask for things such as the owner's name, the owner's last known contact information, and again, we're talking about your customer, a description of the property, the value of the property or the credit balance if it's on your AR, that's associated with the costs, and any less any set-offs that you have. And it may need you have the costs that you've taken out of there written down in a signed written agreement in order to back you up. You'll need to provide the date the property or the credit became demandable or returnable, and if you have it, a Social Security number or tax identification number. And then the question becomes, which state do you report to? Usually the state in which the owner lives. Next, the state where the transaction arose, because you may not know where the debtor, or excuse me, your creditor currently lives. If you knew, you would have sent the property to them. Next, the state where your company is domiciled. And if you're just not sure, and if there's enough property in limbo, enough of a credit balance in limbo, there are rules for what happens if the applicable state doesn't have an unclaimed property statute, but your state does, or the states both have unclaimed property statutes, and they want to fight over which one gets the property. Note that you need to keep a copy of the report and the balances in some states for 10 years. Utah specifies a 5-year holding statute. And when do you file a report? Well, in many states, it's November 1st for all property that became reportable by June 30th of that same year. Note here that all the states aren't the same. So you need to check state by state, depending on which states you think you are holding your customer's property, and see what the time frames are there. And at the same time the report is filed, the property needs to be paid or delivered to the state. What happens after I file and turn over the property? Well, usually the state sells the items in a public sale and holds the cash for the rightful owner. If you sent cash to them, that's all they're going to hold. The state may dispose of anything that will cost more to sell than it's worth. And if your customer asks for the property, direct them to the state. You can pay the money over to the customer and request payment from the state, but I would suggest that it's probably safer for you to go ahead and just direct them to the state. So what happens to the property that remains unclaimed? Well, the states usually pay that into a general fund, but they hold enough to handle the normal claims that they receive during the year. In Utah, they pay it over to the state school fund. Lastly, what if I don't file or turn over the funds? That's not a good position to take, because most states assess interest and penalties. The states have the right to perform audits even if you say that there's nothing there. They can still come in and audit your records. And if they find that you had property that you could have and should have reported and or turned over, you can be charged for the cost of an audit, and that's if you fail or refuse to file or file an incorrect report. So you want to be accurate on these. And there can be penalties in some states that include criminal charges if they determine that the failure to file was fraudulent or you intentionally didn't file. Now, anybody have questions on this? Okay, go ahead with your questions.
You spoke about there being a $50 limit. What was that again?
Well, most of the states provide for what we call de minimis amounts, so that if you're holding property that's less than $50 in value, the state really doesn't want to deal with that. So you probably don't have to report that or turn it over, depending on what it is you're holding. But you need to check state by state to see what that de minimis amount may be.
Okay. If my company is holding money, how do I pay that to the state?
Okay, with the report that you file, there'll be directions as to how you do that. In the cases that we're talking about today, with credit balances on accounts receivable ledgers, we're really talking about cash. So it's easy in the situation that we're talking about today. You will just attach a check to your report and send it off to the state. If you have, say, rock crushing equipment that you've taken and that's what you have to turn over, you'll need to contact the state and make arrangements as to how they want to pick that up or have it delivered. And what they may do in that case is elect to hold an auction right on your property if you're already holding that. But that's something that you'll work out directly with the state. For today, probably you just have to cut a check and attach it with your report.
Do we have to wait the full 3 years to report or remit to the state?
No, you don't have to wait the full 3 years, but you have the 3 years in most states to find your customer, what we'll call here the creditor. It's kind of like a speed limit. You can go below the speed limit, meaning that you could file earlier than 3 years, but you can't go longer than that. So, and again, that's going to vary from state to state, but under the Uniform Unclaimed Property Act, it specifies 3 years.
Could you explain how the 3-year period works? And when I file, I'm not sure I understood that.
Great question. The 3-year period, for most states, let's say that you're in year 00 and the property is still in your possession June 30th, 01. On June 30th, that property becomes, it's still in your possession on 03, so you've had it for 3 years. So June 30th, 03, that property becomes reportable to the state. So you've had it through 1, 2, and 3, and whatever you had up until that point in time becomes reportable. If it becomes reportable because now you've had it for 3 years and that 3 years expires, say, at the end of August, that's going to go on your next year's report. So whatever you've had for 3 years during the period that ends on year 03, that's what you're going to include in your report. And then in November is when you'll file that report and turn the money over. So you've got June 30th is the reporting cutoff period, and November is the filing payment period. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Well, now you're probably asking, where can you find specific information? Well, if you go to the NACM Manual of Credit and Commercial Laws, which you may or may not have on your desk, but if you don't, you should, it will have a short statement there of the escheatment laws, what they are, what they constitute, and it will have something state by state. If you do not have that book, then you'll want to contact Georgette Bevan here in our office. Her number is 801-433-6116, and she can get that book for you. I think it's around $85, maybe $90. Comes out the first of each year, so there'll be a new one coming out 2012. It is a great reference book, and every credit manager should have that book on their desk. And I'll share this secret with you, that as I answer questions for people and they think that I actually know what I'm doing, while I'm talking to them about the weather, etc., wherever they're located, I'm looking the answer up in that book. And then they just think I automatically know. But it's a great resource. Also, you can just Google unclaimed property laws. You'll get a lot of different things that come up on that. And I've listed one such site that may come up under Google, and that's www.missingmoney.com. It's got a lot of information on there as well. So Googling is a great resource, and of course you're always welcome to call us, and you're welcome to flatter me by making me think that I really know something when I'm looking it up in the book. We appreciate your attendance today. There's a general number for you, 801-487-8781. You're always welcome to call us, and we will do our best to help you with any questions or at least send you in the right direction. Thank you for attending today.